Hey everybody, how's it going? Ben, good to see you. Cheryl Tislow Millette is sitting right next to me. Derek, glad you're on with us. Misty, good to see you. Sue, I'm glad you're with us too. Hope you're feeling okay. Susan, see you popping in. Nice to see you. Got some folks over on YouTube as well. Glad you all are with us this evening. Feel free to drop a comment and say hi. How's everybody doing? Thanks, Ben. That is always good to know. What's everybody accomplished so far this week? 40% of the way through your work week. Susan says she's better. That's good. We are going to back up tonight. We're not going to go super slow or anything like that. But we're going to take a look at repeating quickly what we looked at last week because I think we were all very distracted by the storm. Probably should have just canceled, but sometimes you got to learn these lessons. Although there was nothing that I would call load bearing, I guess would be a way to put it. So probably will be okay. Let's see if I can figure out how to do this the way I want it. Let's do that down like that. There we go. All right. That works. Ben said they had the first fire evacuation at Dalton High School. Not just a drill, huh? Something legitimate? Student had lithium batteries in his pocket and it caught fire. They will do that. That's why if you ever fly with anything that has lithium batteries, they have to be in the passenger compartment so that if there is a fire, it can quickly be addressed and put out. You're not ever supposed to store anything with lithium batteries in your checked luggage. Hope everybody's okay in that situation. I wonder how fancy I can get here. Got a little bit of a new computer set up that I'm trying to tweak. Jennifer Morgan says hello from YouTube. Glad to see you. Yeah, that did not really work the way I wanted it to. Let's see. All right, we'll put that back up here. Put this over here. Okay. So we'll get started here in just a minute. Jennifer, hope you're all doing okay. Hope Jacob is Caleb is feeling better. I've got Jacob on my mind as we look at our Genesis study, although it's not Jacob we'll be talking about tonight, but his son Joseph. Let's see, I've lost my, here we go, Facebook, there we are. Be back Sunday, good. Be looking forward to seeing you all. Dorothy Collier, good to see you this evening. Janice says that she will not be here tonight, just found out her Uncle Bill died. Catch you all next Tuesday. Very sorry to hear that, Janice, and of course we understand. Jennifer's moved over to Facebook. Ben says that the student was rushed to the hospital. We will pray that he is okay. And it is 7:09. Let's go ahead and get started and see what we can get through tonight. So I won't read the scripture word for word. We did that last week. It's up on all the places. You can go through the videos on Facebook and you can go through the videos on YouTube and you will find them. So basically what happened is Joseph was taken down into Egypt by this new person of some high office had bought him, and Joseph was therefore his servant, as was the custom in the time. Servants who were really competent were often given household management responsibilities, and Joseph quickly rose to those kinds of positions almost everywhere that he ever was. In fact, eventually everywhere that he ever was. So unfortunately, the guy's wife had the hots for Joseph, and he was not interested in her, or if he was interested in her, he was more interested in being ethical and not engaging in relationships with his master's wife. And he refused her, and she got upset about that, and so she sort of made up a story that he had assaulted her. And the master, probably more in an attempt to save face than anything else, threw him into their version of prison. Remember, their version, thank you, Ben, their version of prison was not what we think of. It was more like a holding cell while he waited for what his sentence would be, although there was no due process at the time, and it could take quite a long time for sentencing, that sort of thing, to happen. Jeff and Jill, glad you are here this evening. Good to see you. Jeff is also over on YouTube. So the next part, what we really want to, so then also when he goes to jail, the jailer notices that he's got an aptitude for running things, and he lets Joseph run everything. So Joseph is basically running the prison that he's in. That's what we talked about last week briefly. And while there are some pretty neat parallels that have to do with sort of the fact that it's a garment of clothing that gets Joseph in trouble, just like it was a garment of clothing, the coat that his father had given to him that got him in trouble with his brothers, and some little things like that that just continue this mirroring, this back and forth sort of ping pong thing that we have in the story of Genesis, but nothing that we need to carry over with us into new learning. So we're going to move on to Genesis 40, in which Joseph starts doing something that he will become quite famous for, and that is interpreting dreams. Now, you'll remember that Joseph had two dreams, and in those dreams, while he offered no interpretation of his own, his brothers, in the first one, he told the dream of his brothers because he saw 11 objects, and so the brothers assumed that it was them, and the premise was that Joseph would be greater than they were. And Joseph is not the youngest, but one of the youngest. And so they think it's ludicrous that they would ever serve Joseph. And so they get upset with him about that. And then he tells another dream to his parents, Jacob and Rachel, and includes in that dream there's a pair of the sun and the moon, and then 11 other objects. And so in this one, even Jacob seems to get upset, and he said, are you saying that we're going to bow down to you? Kind of I don't know, Jacob seems to take it a little more seriously, possibly, but anyway, he has those dreams. So now Joseph is going to become the interpreter of dreams, which is probably how we have come to know Joseph as we've read through the Bible stories of our youth, perhaps. So here we are, Genesis 40. Sometime after this, so he's been there for a while, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker offended their lord, the king of Egypt. So I don't think it's coincidence that the two people that are in here are the person that brings the king of Egypt his drink, and the person who bakes the king of Egypt his food. It says Pharaoh was angry with his two officers. So just to throw out an educated guess, and this is not my educated guess. I'm not really educated enough to make this guess, but some of the resources that I read were probably there was an attempt to poison the king. And so the king knew it had to be either the person who brought him his drink or the person who brought him his food, but he didn't know which one. And so I think the fact that he didn't just kill them both shows that he's got some restraint. The fact that he doesn't throw them deep into a dungeon and throw away the key shows some restraint. The fact that they are two in the same sort of holding place where Joseph is awaiting some sort of resolution to find out who's guilty and who's not is important. So the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them because, again, he took care of everything in the prison, and he waited on them, and they continued for some time in custody. So it's already been some time after Joseph has been there, and now after they're there, it's some more time. So a good deal of time has passed. I think at some point it might say that it's 2 years, or that might be the normal interpretation of the time he spent in this particular predicament. They both dreamed. They had dreams. The cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own meaning. So here we're told up front that they have two different dreams, and that the two different dreams have two different meanings. The problem is they have nobody to interpret the dreams. When Joseph came to them in the morning to see how they were, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, the cupbearer and the bread baker, "Why are your faces downcast today?" And they said, "We've had dreams and there's no one to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." So there's some importance to look at the words that Joseph says. He doesn't say, "Oh, I have the gift of interpreting dreams. That's something I'm really good at. That's a gift that God gave me because God loves me. Lay it on me. I'll tell you exactly what it means." Perhaps showing a little emotional maturity, recognizing the fact that indicating that he might be in a higher place of status than his brothers led to his downfall. Not that we're going to blame the victim here, but this is a different approach for Joseph. He says that interpretations of dreams belong to God. And indeed, in this time period, the ability to interpret dreams would, I think we would equate them to a spiritual gift, like the ability to interpret tongues, for instance, or whatever your spiritual gift might be. Mine's sarcasm, but you might have a different kind of spiritual gift. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph, and he said, In my dream, there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms came out, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Well, this would be appropriate for the cupbearer, right? Who brings what would the king have drank? Probably a lot of, more than anything else back in those days. Probably liked his wine. So there's grapes. He's definitely becoming, well, I won't say definitely. I agree with you, Ben, that he is becoming more mature. I don't know at what point you could say he has matured completely, but he's definitely on his way. And it very well might be at this time. So again, he's got a vine. There's 3 branches. It budded, and the clusters ripened into grapes. He says, Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, and I pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I placed the cup into Pharaoh's hand. This was his subconscious, perhaps, remembering that he was the person who brought wine to his Pharaoh, to his king. And so Joseph said to him, this is its interpretation. And note, it doesn't say here Joseph prayed, Joseph thought about it, Joseph took some time off. It just, he immediately knows it. Again, this is a gift of the Spirit, who is, as of yet, really unnamed in the Old Testament. It's the gift of God, nonetheless. The 3 branches are 3 days. And maybe it's important for you to know, maybe it's not. 3 days is an idiomatic phrase used in the Old Testament, just as 40 days is idiomatic in both the New Testament and the Old Testament. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness, this whole kind of thing. We have idioms that we use with numbers. I like the way the French do it. They say for the 36th time, you know, if I've told you once, I've told you 36 times. That's the number they always use. We just say whatever we want to exaggerate. If I've told you once, I've told you 100 times. If I told you once, I've told you 1,000 times. So in this case, it might say, you know, the point being they're not necessarily 3 literal days. So let's not get caught up on this and try to equate anything, say for instance, with the resurrection that had a 3-day time period, although there were 3 separate days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, but feels more like 2. But anyway, you get the idea of what I'm trying to explain to you. Also, if I feel a little low energy tonight, a little tired, I want you to know I'm still very excited about this material. I am very tired. Week after Easter is the week that we recuperate, so I'm trying to do a little recuperating. But I'm still fully invested in this, and I love this study. I love this deep dive into Scripture that I don't really get to do in church, because if I do, I'll end up preaching until 12:20, and nobody wants that. It's a joke for everybody who was at the later service Easter morning. Hard to do a 2-part sermon on Easter. Okay. So back to 3 days. He says that the branches are 3 days. And so within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But remember me when it is well with you. Okay, now I'm having a hard time not correlating. I really don't want to go back and say that the 3 days here are representative of the 3 days between the crucifixion and the resurrection, because I really don't think that's the case. But what does the thief who's, and this man's not dying, but what does the thief who's next to Christ on the cross says? He says, when you come into your kingdom, remember me. And that's really what Joseph is saying. He's saying, when you're restored to your kingdom, remember me. And do recall that I said that Joseph will be sort of a precursor of the messianic figure. So, and don't mistake that. I'm not saying that Joseph is Christ, or that he's even at the level of Christ. He's not remotely, no more than I am. Well, maybe more than I am, but the point being that that's not the correlation to draw. But it just is interesting, I think. Remember me when it is well with you. Please do me the kindness to make mention of me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this place. He's like, look, you're getting ready to be out of here, and when you are out of here, if you could just tell Pharaoh that I'm a nice guy and that I helped you, and that I would never do anything, untoward towards his wife, maybe he'll let me out of here. I'd kind of like to get out of this place. And he says, he goes on and tells him a little bit of a story. He says, in fact, I was stolen out of the land of the Hebrews. So that shouldn't have happened. And then I was, the implication is then he was sold into slavery, and that shouldn't have happened. And then he said, here also I've done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. Now, I wonder what the also means here. He says, here also I have done nothing that they should put me in the dungeon. That could mean just in the same way that I was stolen out of the land of the Hebrews. That shouldn't have happened. But I think actually he's telling this cupbearer, just like you should never have been put in this dungeon, I should not have been put in this dungeon. We have this thing in common. So since you're going to be getting out of here, please remember me. And this is important when, as brothers and sisters in Christ, when we are asked to remember one another, when it's advantageous, not exploitive, but when it's important, we need to do that, especially if we say we're going to. If I ever tell you that I will be praying for you, you need to know that not only do I pray for you in the future, almost all the time, but I absolutely pray for you right there in that moment. Because sometimes in my early ministry, I would say, oh, I'll pray for you about that. And then I would see them the next Sunday and realize that I had forgotten to pray. And I'd make a quick prayer then. But when I tell people I'll pray for them, I do it instantly, because as humans, we are forgetful. And sadly, a little bit of foreshadowing for you, a little bit of a spoiler alert, but the cupbearer is going to forget all about Joseph for a while. Kimberly Nunez, it is good to see you, listening on the drive home from work as normal, and now you're with us in person, and we are glad to see you. All right, so interesting dream, interesting interpretation. I will tell you that it is it comes to pass just as Joseph says. When the chief, I love this. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, so he waited to see what Joseph might say before he checked. He said to Joseph, I also had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh. But the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head. And Joseph answered, this is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Well, this is familiar. God must have been getting pretty excited at this point. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you. Dun, dun, dun. I love that twist. What a wordplay our author in the Old Testament has here. The Pharaoh will lift up your head, and the man must be really excited. And then he says, from you. Like he's going to do something that's going to practically separate your head from your body. And he'll hang you on a pole, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. So not only is this not the good interpretation, but if we're going to just accept my educated guess that Pharaoh there had been a poisoning attempt on his life, or he was actually poisoned and he didn't know who it was, and he wasn't quick to judge. He wasn't rash. He put the cupbearer and the baker into this holding place until they could figure out what was happening. Looks like maybe somebody talked and he found out that it was the baker who made the poisoning attempt. A guess, but again, an educated guess, and again, not my education, but a good guess anyway. So it happened to be, and perhaps, well, I would say without a doubt, Joseph knew this. Joseph knew that, and it's okay. It's okay to use knowledge. It's okay for Joseph to have used knowledge that he had garnered and able to help interpret a dream. Okay, that makes it more impressive, not less. So he probably knew that Pharaoh's birthday was in 3 days, and he probably knew that things happened when it was the king's birthday, pardons and convictions and things like that. So on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all of his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his cupbearing, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand, but the chief baker he hanged, just as Joseph had interpreted to them. And then we have a sad scripture, the very end of Genesis 40. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Look over my notes really quickly. No. I said everything I wanted to say on that. Oh, this is something that's very important. Joseph's station doesn't change as a result of this. Hey, Sarah, I'm sorry that you did not get the notice for the live. Since you said that, I'm gonna make sure it's in here. We have seen that some people have accidentally blocked the phone number on their phone, which we cannot do anything about. You might check your blocked numbers on your phone and make sure you didn't accidentally block us. Then sometimes if you hit pound or star while you're listening, or when you get a text, or while you're listening to a phone call, it will opt you out. But let me go into contacts. Unless you meant like you didn't get the notice for the live from Facebook, which is sadly completely out of my... Yep, nope. Your phone number is here. Let me look real fast at... this particular broadcast. It says 100% were sent, delivered, and let's look for Sarah. So Sarah, I will just tell you that it says that your message was delivered at 5:59 p.m. and I'm going to text you. Oh, the Facebook Live. Got you. Well, if you check your phone, you should be getting text messages that say when I'm going out. Facebook does its own thing, and we have absolutely no control over that. So that's why I try to send a text message out every time I stream, because I've learned that we cannot trust. We can't trust Facebook. Okay, so this is the part that I wanted to say. Joseph did everything he was supposed to do. God gave him help to interpret the dreams, which in turn should have helped him by the cupbearer being happy and remembering him, might have gotten him out of prison. So as is often the case, Joseph needed 2 things to come together. He needed God's will to be done, in terms of the gift that God was going to give, and he needed God's will to be done in terms of, assuming it was God's will, which I guess we don't know, but let's go with that. Let me rephrase it. He needed human help and he needed divine help. He got the divine help. He didn't get the human help. And so quite often in your life, when you go through an experience where you feel like you didn't get something that you needed, you might want to look at that. You know, like if you're applying for a job and you pray to God that you'll get the job and you don't get the job, it's very possible that God did God's part, but the human beings that were involved didn't do their part. I think that story is well reflected in the story of the cupbearer not remembering Joseph. All right. I'm still looking at my notes for this chapter, and I want to make sure I did not miss anything. No. Okay. So now we're going to look at Joseph 41, and this is going to be it for today. We're actually going to go through 3 chapters, and we might be done early. We might not be. So here's what I referred to earlier. Now we have, after 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile, and there came out of the Nile 7 sleek and fat cows, and they grazed in the reed grass. Then 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. The ugly and thin cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows, and Pharaoh awoke. So that's a pretty vivid dream. 7 beautiful cows, 7 ugly cows, and the 7 ugly cows ate the 7 beautiful cows. Okay. And so something else that was very significant at this time was this belief that every dream had a meaning. And the Pharaoh and people in positions, high positions, had people that would interpret dreams for them. So Pharaoh wakes, and then, as is often the case, especially with me, since I was awake at 3 o'clock, I'm very happy when I fall back asleep. He fell asleep and dreamed a second time. 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on a stalk. Then 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind, sprouted after them. The thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. Pharaoh woke, and it was a dream. I like this line. Pharaoh awoke, and it was a dream. We already know it's a dream. This implies to me that for Pharaoh, it was very real. I mean, I guess most of our dreams feel very real. It's kind of rare that you realize that you're actually dreaming. But the author of this story wants us to know that this was very real to Pharaoh. And then when he woke up, he was probably somewhat relieved to find it was a dream, but he was also desperate to understand what the dream meant. In the morning, his spirit was troubled, so he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. And then this jogs a memory, and we find out that the chief cupbearer is actually a decent guy. He's just kind of incompetent when it comes to remembering people. But the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "I remember my faults today. Once Pharaoh was angry with his servants." I love the third person talk. "Once you were angry with me and the baker, and you put us in the custody in the house of the captain of the guard. We dreamed on the same night, each and I having a dream with its own meaning." He didn't mention they were very similar, but he said there was a young Hebrew there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving us an interpretation to each according to his dream. As he interpreted to us, so it turned out. I was restored to my office and the baker was hanged. So he said, hey, I know a guy who not only could interpret a dream, but it actually came true. I suspect that that was kind of rare. I suspect that the magicians and the wise men often interpreted dreams, and those dreams did not come true. And I also kind of have a feeling, although it's not theologically important, that perhaps when they misinterpreted dreams, bad things happened to them because nobody's even willing to take a guess as to what these dreams from Pharaoh mean. So Pharaoh says, okay, and he sends for Joseph, and Joseph was hurriedly brought out of the dungeon. When he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I've had a dream, and there's no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not I. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Now that is an interesting line of scripture. That is not something he said to the baker. He had not heard the baker's dream, but he said, yeah, I'll interpret it. And it ended up not being favorable. So now, without even hearing of Pharaoh's dream, he is putting God on notice. Hey, God, I don't want to die. And, killing the messenger is a thing. It's a cliche because cliches stem from real life things. And so, God, it's going to be time for you to give me a favorable interpretation of this dream, or this is probably the end for me. So I need you to do me a solid. And this one, see, here's a case where it's just on God. No human being can interfere with this. The interpretation, and Joseph's going to be honest, he doesn't not pray. He doesn't say, okay, well, I'm going to make up a favorable interpretation or else this guy's going to kill me. He just says, God, I need a good interpretation. And so he tells Pharaoh, he says, it's not I. I'm not the one who interprets the dreams. God interprets them, and then I just say what's on God's mind. But if you tell me your dream, I am certain that God will give you a favorable answer. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, and now we're going to have a repetition. We've got the author again, who comes in and out of Genesis, who loves to repeat himself. In my dream, I was standing on the banks of the Nile, and 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the Nile and fed in the reed grass. Then the 7 other cows came up after them, poor, very ugly and thin. Never have I seen such ugly ones in all the land of Egypt. The thin and ugly cows ate up the first 7 fat cows, but when they had eaten them, no one would have known that they had done so, for they were still ugly as before, and then I awoke. So now we even get more details from the dream. So he's, and that happens sometimes too, if you think about that. I've told Cheryl dreams about I've had before that were kind of interesting, or at least they were to me. She probably thought they were boring. But then later I would say, oh, I remembered something else from that dream. That all happened, it's all happened to all of you, right? So he's remembering some more details. He said, then I awoke. I fell asleep a second time. I like this note. The Hebrew lacks, I fell asleep a second time. But let's just throw it in the scripture anyway, even though it's not there. But that's okay. It helps clear things up. I slept again, and I saw in my dreams 7 ears of grain, full, good, growing on one stalk, and 7 ears withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind sprouting after them, and the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. But when I told it to the magicians, there was no one who could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, and by the way, I think there's a real note of authenticity here, because the interpretation of the dream is not necessarily favorable in and of itself, which you will find out in just a minute. But I guess it is definitely favorable in that it gives Pharaoh time to act. And that's what we need sometimes. We don't always need the best news in the world, but if we're going to get some bad news, we need a little time to prepare for the bad thing to happen. And that's what happens here. And perhaps that's what qualifies this interpretation as a favorable response from God. Joseph said to Pharaoh, your dreams are one and the same. God's revealed to you what he's about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are the same. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, as are the 7 empty ears blighted by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is as I told you. God has shown to you what he's about to do. So there will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. After them will arise 7 years of famine, and the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land. The plenty will no longer be known in the land because of the famine that will follow. People don't remember how great it was when it's bad, right? Just focusing on how bad things are. The plenty will no longer be known in the land because the famine will follow, for it will be very, very grievous. And the doubling of your dream means that this thing is fixed by God. Because you had the dream twice, that means this is going to happen. There's nothing you can do to stop this from happening. Maybe if he had just had the dream once, he could have repented or believed in God, you know, in the way that Jacob did, in the way that the Hebrews did. But he's saying that the fact that you dreamt it twice means this thing's going to happen, and it means it's coming pretty quick. Like the 7 years of really good crops are coming very quickly, and immediately after that, 7 years of famine. So then he, this is very smart. He doesn't say, okay, listen, Pharaoh, this is what you do. I've got this taken care of I'm gonna do, you just let me handle it. I know exactly what to do. He lets Pharaoh take the lead. I heard a fable when I was young. It was in my dad's 2nd grade reader. And it was the story about a lion, a fox, and a donkey who all went out hunting one day together. And they had a great hunt and got a great deal of meat, and they came back. And the lion said to the donkey and the fox, he says, why don't one of you take this food and separate it into 3 piles for us so that we can share the food? And so the fox said he would do it, and he divided all the food up into 3 perfect piles, and then he invited the lion to pick which one of the 3 almost perfectly divided piles that he wanted. And the lion immediately jumped on the donkey and killed him. He scooped all the meat together and added the the fox to it, not the donkey. Added the fox to it, and he turned to the donkey and he said, donkey, why don't you divide the food between us? And the donkey said, oh, I'd be glad to. And he made 1 huge pile and 1 tiny pile, and he kept the tiny pile and he gave the huge pile to the lion. And the lion said, oh, you're amazing. Who taught you how to divide prey so well? And the donkey said, the fox did. I was in my dad's 2nd grade reader. Good lesson for life. So Joseph knows who the lion here is, although eventually one of his brothers will become, one of his brother's descendants will be known as the Lion of Judah, but nonetheless, not related. He says, here, just let Pharaoh select a man who's discerning and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. You know, just any discerning and wise person that comes to mind. Anybody that you might be thinking of right now who's really discerning, you know, probably pretty good at interpreting dreams, but discerning, that's the important thing. Somebody who's very wise, just anybody that comes to mind. And then why don't you go ahead and appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plenteous years. Let them gather all the food for these good years that are coming and lay up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be reserved for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to befall the land of Egypt, so that the land of Egypt may not perish through the famine. So he still kind of gives it to Pharaoh and says, "Why don't you just pick somebody and do this thing?" And just as I know you would have come up with, just during the years that we have a lot, let's put some back. For the years that we don't have any, I think that'll be a good thing to do. This is an interesting, yes, he was a carnivorous donkey, and my dad's second grade reader, Kim. He was born in 1921, so second grade would have still been, like 1928 or so. So, I don't know where science was on carnivorous donkeys back in those days. So yeah, things are going to be so good. There's going to be so much food that let's save it. I do think this is interesting to compare to the parable that Jesus tells about the man who stores up grain. And he stores up so much grain that he has to tear down all of his barns and build bigger barns so that he can store more grain. And then I forget if it's God or an angel comes down to him and says, "You fool, this very night, the God demands your life from you, and all that you've done is wasted." Boy, it's all about balance, You can't just blindly go for the acquisition of wealth. It's kind of like people who are buying up toilet paper and hand sanitizer and selling it for insane profits at the beginning of COVID. God's not into that. But I don't think God minded it if you bought a little extra hand sanitizer for yourself and toilet paper for yourself when you could, to weather the storm, such as it were. Again, it's about balance. So much about God and our relationship with God and our relationships with one another through God is about balance. So, this pleased Pharaoh, this proposal, and all of his servants. And then Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find anyone like this? Who would be the person that is discerning and wise, one of whom is of the Spirit of God?" "Oh, I know," Pharaoh says to Joseph, "since God has shown you all this, there's no one so as discerning and as wise as you." You can just see Joseph saying, "Oh, that's so kind." "You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only with regard to the throne will I be greater than you." Listen to that. He is saying, you can command them exactly like I can command them. It's still going to be my throne. It's like one of those things where I asked my mom why she and my dad never fought. And she said that throughout their life, they just decided that she would make all the minor decisions and he would make all the major ones. And in all their years of marriage, nothing major ever came up. So that's kind of what's going on with the Pharaoh here. He's letting Joseph be in charge of all the minor decisions. But if anything major does come up, he wants them to know, "I'm still the boss of you, but I'm gonna let." So this is a boy, right? He's sold into slavery as a boy. It's only 2 years after this. What is he, like 19 now at this point? And he is almost equal, even though he is a slave at the time, a servant at the best. He's been bought and paid for. He's been put in charge. He's been given a position of authority, only equal and only surpassed by the Pharaoh. It's amazing what God can do. And none of this ever would have happened if Joseph's brothers hadn't thrown him into the pit, and if the Ishmaelites hadn't come by and bought him and ended up selling him to the man whose wife was... And in fact, if his wife, this guy's wife, hadn't come on to Joseph and Joseph refused and he got thrown into prison, he never would have met the two men, the cupbearer and the baker, whose dreams he interpreted, and then they wouldn't have known to tell Pharaoh that he could interpret dreams. I mean, you can look at this one of two ways, and I have a very strong preference for the way in which I hope that you will view it. You can look at it as in, well, God had a plan. I think most of you know that I do not like that phrase. I like all things work for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. God can make it work, even if it's not working like you think it should work, even if it's not working like you were sure it was going to work, even if it's not going the way that God would have liked it to have gone, God will still redeem it because God makes all things work for good. So all these bad things that happen, God made work for good. And so now Joseph has risen to this position of authority. Okay, Ben. Well, you probably typed that right before I said I hope that you wouldn't say that, but it's okay. You can. I'm not here to strip anybody's theology away from them, but here's the thing about God having a plan. God's plans get disrupted all the time. That's why Jesus said, when you pray, pray like this. And part of that was, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, indicating very clearly that God's will is not always done on earth, whereas in heaven, God's will is always done. But what happens is when things don't go according to the plan that God has made, God still uses them for good. And sometimes God does have a plan. It's not that God never has a plan. I mean, God always has a plan, and sometimes things go according to plan. So who could know? So Pharaoh removed a signet ring from his hand. Pharaoh put it on Joseph's hand. Does that remind you of the story of the prodigal son at all? He arrayed him in garments of fine linen. Does that remind you of the story of the prodigal son at all? And put a gold chain around his neck. The prodigal son got sandals on his feet, but he probably needed them more than he needed a gold chain. Anyway, he had him ride in the chariot of his second in command, and they cried out in front of him, bow the knee. So he let everybody know that they needed to kneel before Joseph. In fact, the Hebrew right there doesn't really say bow the knee as much as it says you should be in a kneeling posture. It means the same thing. Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. I don't understand why I've got this word highlighted. Let me get rid of that. There we go. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no one shall lift up hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And then, as is often the case, Pharaoh gave Joseph a new name. Not that Pharaoh was necessarily always giving people a new name, but in the Old Testament, people are always getting new names. Abraham becomes Abram, Sarai becomes Sarah, Jacob becomes Israel, and now Joseph becomes Zaphanath Paneah. Zaphanath Paneah. I'm sure it's a very very Egyptian name. And he gave to Joseph Asenath, daughter of Potiphera. Well, Potiphera, turns out, assuming that it is the same, let's see, that's Potiphar. Excuse me, let me not misspeak. Potiphar versus Potiphera. Okay, probably a different person with a very similar name. We would call him Nathan. No, never mind. Ignore that. Potiphera. Anyway, he gave him an Egyptian daughter as his wife. And this is how Joseph gained authority over the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old. Okay, now we've got a little chronological kind of things that I don't quite understand. Joseph was quite young. We're told when he was sold into slavery. I guess the time lapse could be that he served in the house of the Potiphar that we spoke about earlier, not Potiphara. not Potiphera. Maybe he served in his house for a long time. But now it says he's 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of the Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. During 7 plenteous years, the earth produced abundantly, just as God had interpreted the dream to him. He gathered up all the food of the 7 years when there was plenty in the land of Egypt and stored up food in the cities. He stored up in every city, the food from the fields around it. So Joseph stored up grain in such abundance, like the sand of the sea, that he stopped measuring it. It was beyond measure. This concept, the sand of the sea, harkens back to God saying that the offspring of Abraham and then Isaac and then Jacob would be more numerous than the number of stars in heaven and more numerous than the number of grains of sand on the earth. So it could be just another idiomatic phrase. An idiom, by the way, if you're not familiar with that word, is a phrase that in any given language we know what it means, but if you translated it to another language, it wouldn't mean the same thing. As an example, if you said it's raining cats and dogs, we would know exactly what you meant. If you translated that to French and said that in French, they would look at you like you were mildly insane, because that's not the idiom that they use for heavy rain. So anyway, he couldn't even measure how much grain that they had. Finishing chapter 41. Sorry, I guess it wasn't short, but we are going to finish chapter 41. Before the years of famine came, Joseph had 2 sons, whom Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, which means making to forget. For he said, God has made me forget all my hardship in my father's house. The second he named Ephraim, which means to be fruitful. Now this is really interesting, and I'll tell you why in just a second. For God has made me fruitful in the land of my misfortunes. So clearly, one way or another, whether it was God's plan all along or whether this was an example of God doing what Paul says and making all things work for good, Joseph is very pleased with his current life. He's got two children whom he loves, Manasseh and Ephraim. The reason I say Ephraim is a particularly interesting word is because in the book of Hosea, God refers to Israel as Ephraim. And in that case, I suppose if Ephraim means fruitful, then that's what it means. But when God calls Israel Ephraim in Hosea, what it really is it's a pet name. It's like calling your wife sweetheart. You know, I don't call Cheryl very often, unless I'm yelling for her downstairs. Then I say, Cheryl! She hates that. I think I sound too much like her mother when I do that. Anyway, interesting name. It's, as I say in the sermon that I wrote about that particular part of Joseph, it's like saying daddy's little girl or mommy's little boy. And then the 7 years of plenty that prevailed in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, just as Joseph had said. But nobody panicked. Nobody panicked in Egypt because they were prepared, because they heard the word of God and they believed it. There's a lesson there. There was famine in every country, but throughout the land of Egypt, there was bread. When all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph. What he says to you, do. And since the famine had spread all over the land, Joseph opened up the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Moreover, all the world came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine became severe throughout the world. Now, there's nothing here to indicate, and it's not in Joseph's character, as far as we can tell, that he's taking advantage of these people and charging them exuberant prices like people were doing with toilet paper and hand sanitizer. But just by charging them a fair price, not only is he providing for those who would starve elsewise, but he's increasing the wealth for Pharaoh. And if you want to make your king happy, keeping him alive by keeping his people alive and increasing his wealth is a really good way to do this. So by the end of this part of the story, Joseph is in Egypt. He is the second most powerful person in Egypt behind only Pharaoh himself. Everybody in Egypt knows that he's in charge, and they don't do anything that he doesn't tell them to do, and does everything that he tells them to do. He's got a wife and he's got 2 kids, and he is thrilled. He's thrilled with his life at this point. He names his children things that indicate that he is quite pleased with his station in life. And that's 3 chapters of Genesis. And when we come back next week, we'll be in chapter 42, where guess who's coming to dinner? Joseph's brothers are going to go to Egypt. And you know why they're going to go to Egypt? Because they're hungry, and Egypt has grain. So everything's coming up roses for Joseph. And that's our lesson for today. I hope that you enjoyed it. Hope that you got something out of it. Hope you got some lessons you can take with you this week and going forward. Hope it gave you more of a foundation for sort of not just the story of Joseph and where that's heading, but the foundational story for the Israelites. This is going to be the story of the Israelites as well. This constant struggle, this ebb and flow, when times are good, when times are bad, how they behave when times are good, how they behave when times are bad. We're getting a lot of foreshadowing right here. So thanks for being here tonight. I'm glad that the weather was much better this week than it was last week. And I'm glad that we could have a good session. So I hope to see you Sunday at church if you are able to come. The week after Easter is the least attended Sunday of the year. So let's see if we can fight that generalization and have a killer Sunday on Sunday, if you're able to make it. In the meantime, God bless, Godspeed, and as always, thanks for watching.